We like to receive the offering in silence. It's more spiritual, you know? Doesn't it just feel like... I blame the sound guy personally, but hey, you know, we'll figure it out. So we're in the second week now of this series that we're calling Better Together, and you know that there are things in life that just go better together, and you know that life gets better when certain things are together. And so for some reason, this always comes back to food for us, right? When you think about what you like to eat, last week it was peach pie and ice cream. You know, they just go better together. And because it's still morning, I thought maybe we would talk about breakfast food. So I hope nobody's too hungry this morning. But you know, for me, I like eggs. Anybody here like eggs? Yeah, eggs are great. I mean, you know, healthy brain food, all that. They're great, protein but even though I like an egg by itself, there's something about adding bacon to eggs. Right? Anybody agree? I mean, don't these two things just go better together? I mean, eggs are good, bacon's good. I'll take either one, but yet it's better when they're together, and my life is better when they're together. Right? Suddenly life goes to a new level when you add bacon to eggs. And there are certain things in life that just go together. They work well together. Another example is pen. You know, you have a pen, you're on the phone, and you need to make a quick note, and you're looking around, and, you know, what are you going to use to make this note that you need to make before you lose the message? You're looking around, and you're saying, there's a pen, and then you find a pen, and then what do you need next? Paper. Pen and paper. So pen and paper, they're better together, and life is better when they are together. So you're not hunting around searching for one versus the other. I mean, yeah, you can write on your skin, and I know, you know, you tech-savvy people can use the Notes app on your phone. I get that, but, you know, there's just something about pen and paper together. And just to be honest, when I was putting this together, I had thought about using the example of a toilet and paper, but I decided that's so immature. That's so inappropriate, so we won't use that this morning, okay? But shout out to all my middle schoolers. Anybody? Last week, I'm going to go a little off script here. Last week, somebody was making some suggestions for things that go better together, and somebody mentioned a swimsuit and a pool. And I agreed with them, right? I was like, yeah, that's a good point. But you know, the more I thought about it this week, I mean, never mind. You know what? That's inappropriate. That's inappropriate for church. So we're not going to talk about that either this morning. But there are some things that go better together and some things that make life better when they are together. Last week we talked specifically about the way that you see yourself and the way that others experience you. That these go better together, and life is better when these are together, when we can close the gap between how we see ourselves and the way that others experience us, that life gets better when they're together. And this morning, I want to talk about climate control. Climate control. Because there's something else that goes better together, and life is better when they are together, and that is how you are when life is hard and how you are when life is easy. See, for a lot of us, there is a gap in these two, right? We are one way when life is hard, and we are one way when life is easy. It's almost like we're two different people depending on what's going on around us and outside of us. We respond differently to people depending on the circumstance. We say different things. We act differently depending on what's going on around us, and there's a gap between these two. But these things go better together, and life definitely gets better when they are together. When we can close the gap between how we are when life is hard and how we are when life is easy. And all of you know this, and not only does your life get better when you can close these for yourself and you can close the gap between these two and bring them together. But life really gets better for those around you when these are together. Life really gets better for those who are around you, who live with you, and who work with you when these are together. And so all of you know a boss. You've worked for a supervisor. When, as long as everything was going to plan and all of the clients were happy and all of the accounts were secure, the boss was great to be around, your supervisor was fantastic, you enjoyed conversations with him or her, you thought maybe I could even be friends with this person, but then there would be some bad news. You would lose an account, you'd lose a client, something wouldn't go as planned in the business. And you and everybody else knew that it was going to be a disaster for whoever had to share this news with that supervisor or that boss. And you were afraid of the response that you were going to get from him or for her when this bad news had to be shared. And all of a sudden, this boss who you enjoyed and liked being around and appreciated turns into Michael Scott. Anybody? Come on, please. You my people. People who are laughing, you my people, okay? Or maybe it's not a boss or a supervisor. Maybe it's a little bit closer to home. You have a friend who you enjoy hanging out with, you enjoy spending time with, you enjoy having conversations with, until something doesn't go right in life, until there's a circumstance in life, there's an illness or bad news, somebody doesn't do something that this friend likes, and all of a sudden the friend is like a different person. Speak differently, act differently because of an outside circumstance on his or her life. And to hit really close to home, and the reason why I really wanted to focus on this subject in this series is mainly because I'm thinking about myself first. But for me, I want this gap to be closed in my life. So if you think about a family member and maybe you have memories of a parent from when you were younger, or maybe you are thinking about a parent right now, maybe you have a spouse or another family member who everybody knows you need to keep the climate a certain condition because of what's going to happen if something changes. And so everybody is trying to control the climate. Everybody is trying to control outside circumstances and control the way that life is going, because you know that there's this family member who's going to act a particular way, who's going to speak a particular way, and it's going to make life miserable for everybody. If something goes bad, something goes wrong, something happens that he or she doesn't like. And I'm thinking about my children especially who are young, and I want them to experience consistency when they look at me as a father. When they are telling stories about me later on in life, it's my dream, it's my hope, it's my goal that they'll talk about me and that I will have been the same person no matter what. And maybe for those of you who are parents and you're in this room, or maybe you're watching online and you've got little ones, you know that this is really difficult. And for some of us, we can really try hard to be consistent, even when our children are inconsistent. And you're doing well, and you're doing well, and you're doing well, and then all of a sudden, something flips, and you're a completely different person. And things were going great until something changed in the climate. The weather changed. There was a circumstance that changed that maybe you didn't have any control over. And it changed the way you are, how you speak, and how you act. I mean, think about the people in your life who have impressed you over the years. If you were just to think about in your mind the people who have been most impressive to you in your life, I would bet that it's people who don't have much of a gap in between the way that they are when life is easy and the way that they are when life is hard. The people who have been most impressive to you, who you think about have the highest character in life, because you've seen them in their lives, and when there is a diagnosis in their life that they don't like, that they didn't want, that they'd rather not have, they don't fall apart. They remain the same. Or if something bad happens to them, if they experience a loss in life, if they lose somebody who they love unexpectedly, there might be a period of mourning and grief, but it doesn't change who they are. It doesn't change the way that they behave. It doesn't change the way that they speak to others in their life. Or if you have somebody in your life who has impressed you, maybe their children went rogue on them at some point in life and went a totally different direction than what they would have hoped for and worked for and dreamed for their children. And they don't deny reality, but yet they're the same person, even when the climate changes. When the climate around them, the climate outside of us, even when that changes, when there's a change in the weather, we remain the same. Those are the people who have impressed you. Those are the people that you think about and you ask yourself, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how she did that. I don't know how he did that. When you think about the people in your life who have impressed you, who you put on a particular pedestal in your mind, and you think about them, I would bet that there's not much of a gap between who they are when life is hard and who they are when life is easy. So Jesus tells this parable, which is a story with a lesson, at the end of this really long teaching. It's recorded by a guy named Matthew, who would have been an eyewitness account to Jesus and his life and his ministry, and who fortunately for us recorded much of what Jesus did and said, and we now have to look at 2,000 years later. And so Matthew records this long teaching of Jesus. And we actually put a name on it in the church. If you are familiar with the teaching and of the book of Matthew in the New Testament of the Bible, you'll know it as the Sermon on the Mount. And so Jesus goes up on a mountain or a hill, and a large crowd gathers in front of him. And he just begins teaching. And he's telling these stories and telling these parables that all have a lesson to them and have moral implications on people's lives, and explaining what the kingdom of heaven is like and who he is and how people should change their hearts and their lives because of who Jesus is and what he is saying. And you should read it for yourself. If this week, go back and look up Matthew. You can look online. You can Google it. You can download the Bible version app to your phone or your tablet and read it for yourself in Matthew 6 and Matthew 7. And at the end of this long teaching, Jesus tells this parable, and he gives instructions on how someone remains the same when life is easy and when life is hard. This is what Jesus says. Everybody who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise builder who built a house on bedrock. So Jesus, as Jesus does as a master storyteller, paints this picture in the minds of his audience, of the people who are listening. And he says, all right, I've said all of these things. Now anybody who takes what I have said and puts them into practice is like a wise builder who built a house on bedrock. So just imagine in your mind a house that has been built, and it's got a solid foundation. And then Jesus turns into a meteorologist. He starts talking about the climate around this house. And Jesus says, the rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew, and it beat against that house. So you have a house, the climate all of a sudden changes, something that's completely outside of our control. And the weather got really harsh, really quickly, and beat on this house. And here's what happened to the house. The house did not fall because it was firmly set on bedrock. It was built on a solid foundation. And so despite the change in the climate outside, the house stood firm and safe and unshaken. And then Jesus flips it, talks about what happens when the house is not built on a firm foundation. And I know so many of you who have been experienced in church life for so many years, you've heard this time and again. And Jesus talks about the other house. He says, everybody who hears these words of mine and doesn't put them into practice will be like a fool who built a house on sand. And then Jesus talks about the same climate as before. He says, again, the rain fell, the floods came, and the wind blew, and it beat. Anybody in here feel like you've been beaten? Anybody in here feel like you're being beaten on? And it beat against that house. But this house that was not built on the rock, on the firm foundation, instead it was built on sand, it falls apart. Jesus said it fell and was completely destroyed. It fell apart. The house that was built on sand, when the climate changed and things got difficult and life began to beat on this house, it fell apart. And so in this story, we see two houses that, as far as we know, are identical, and two climates that are the same in both scenarios. The houses are the same. As a matter of fact, if you're driving by these houses, and I know you're picturing in your mind right now, just like the hearers of Jesus' words originally would have thought, you're picturing in your mind two houses. You're driving by these houses. You can't necessarily see the foundation. They both might look like the same house. And they both might look fantastic when the weather is good. Right? They just painted it, got new shutters, power washed the driveway. Both of them have a really nice wreath, handmade, from supplies from Michael's, hanging on the front door. And you think to yourself, wow, I wonder who lives in those houses when the weather's nice and the sun is shining. But when the climate changes, when there's a change in the weather, which there always will be, completely outside of our control, and the storms come, and they beat on the houses, and the rains come, one of them falls apart. The thing about a house falling apart is that you have to rebuild it. And how many times have we rebuilt the house, but we rebuilt it on sand again, and we spent so much time trying to make it look pretty when the weather was nice, but yet when the storms came, it collapsed again. And we had to rebuild it. And we thought, maybe this time I'll build a brick house. It didn't work. Okay, next time I'll build a house out of stone. It didn't work. And we keep changing what the house looks like when we build it, but we don't change the foundation on which it's built. And see, when we think about these houses, when we think about these houses that have been built and the climate around them, we try to make the house look so pretty. But we don't really consider the climate on the inside of the house. And so we spend all of this time trying to make the house look good on the outside, and we have all of these people who are trying to control the weather on the outside, and they spend so much of their time and energy trying to control the climate on the outside, but they don't give much attention to the climate on the inside. And what if we spent as much energy healing the climate inside as we do trying to control the climate outside? What if we spent as much energy trying to heal the climate on the inside as we do trying to control the climate on the outside? And when we think about Jesus and these words, and he says, whoever does these words, puts them into practice, if you hear them and you believe them, that's great, but it's not until you actually put them into practice that they become a foundation on which your life can stand, even when the storms of life come and beat against you, even when people come and beat against you, even when the climate around you changes, even when the diagnosis and the health change, even when you lose the job unexpectedly, over which we have no control. We probably think about the words that Jesus said as commandments. Right? Jesus said, do this and don't do that. And it's like Jesus is saying, if you would just follow the rules, right? If you would follow the rules that I'm laying out for you, then it can be a foundation on which you can stand. And that's partially true. We can't deny that. That's partially true. But that's about half of the foundation. That's half of the foundation. It's not just the commandments of Jesus, it's the promises of Jesus. And for me, I'd rather stand on the promises of Jesus than on just his commandments. And so the other half of the foundation is the promises of Jesus. And when we can learn how to stand on the commandments of Jesus, along the promises of Jesus, and really it's the promises of Jesus and the life that he wants for us, the full life that he wants for us, if we can stand on that and allow that to drive the way that we stand on his commandments, then our foundation changes. Our foundation solidifies. And it doesn't matter what comes against us, because the one who's for us is our foundation. And so it doesn't really matter what happens outside of us. And I'm not saying that we deny reality. I'm not saying that we deny our feelings. And I'm also not saying that that's just the way I am, because that's an excuse that so many of us use, that when the climate changes outside and we become a different person because life went from easy to hard. And when we say that, what we really mean is that life went from the way I wanted it to go to a different way. Life is not going according to the plan that I had, the dream that I had. And it's not going according to the way that I would choose. And that's what we really mean when we say that life is easy or hard. It's not going the way that I wanted it to go. But you know what? That's just the way I am. And Jesus says, it's not so much the way you are, but it's on whom you're standing. It's on what you're standing. And so if you want it to change, you have to change the foundation. You have to stand on my promises. And I'm sure many of you who live in this community and around, and maybe it's not the case if you're watching online, but around here, there's a lot of building going on. There's a lot of building going on. It's like any part of land that didn't have something built on it, all of a sudden is being built upon. And as I look, they start with the foundation. They start with the foundation when they're building a house or a new building. And it's amazing, just between my drive from my house here to the church, how many new neighborhoods are popping up and how many houses are being built in those neighborhoods. And every time I drive past a new neighborhood or I drive past a new house that's being built, I have yet to see a house being built by one person. I have yet to see a house being built by a single builder. Every time I see a house being built, there's a group of people working on it. There's a team of people who are working on building that house. And so this morning, I want to ask you, who's helping you build your house? Who is helping you in life build your house? As we think about launching our small groups this fall, as we think about the Group Link event next Friday, August 25th, here at the church at 7 o'clock, do you have a group of people who are helping you build your house on a foundation that is going to stand firm when the climate changes? Or do you surround yourself with people who want to just control the climate outside? Would you rather be with a group of people and have people who could speak into your life, who could encourage you, especially when times get hard, who can continue to point you to the promises of a God who loves you? And they could say, no, you're slipping off the foundation. And they can encourage you back onto that foundation. They can encourage you back onto the promises that Jesus has made to you, and continue to help you to make those promises your foundation. The way that we put these into practice, Jesus says you don't just hear the words and receive them and believe them, but you do them, you put them into practice. How do you do the promises of Jesus? Maybe it's as simple as keeping our eyes on Him, keeping our focus on Him. Because if you're like me, when the climate changes and the rains fall and the wind blows and it beats against you, you tend to focus on the wind and the rain and the storms. And I need people to say, put your eyes back on the promises and stand on the foundation of those promises. Not on the storm around you, not on the climate around you. And it's continuously being pointed back to the promises of Jesus that heals the climate within. Over and over and over again, that foundation is strengthened, and suddenly the climate inside doesn't change. We acknowledge our feelings, we acknowledge reality. We don't pretend to be something we're not. We don't pretend not to feel things. We are real, we are authentic, but yet we stay the same person, and the people around us no longer have to worry about controlling the climate outside, because there's always a peaceful climate inside. And so think about this as we look at the teachings of Jesus and the promises of Jesus, and we make that the foundation on which we build our lives, and we do it with a team of people who are seeking the same thing in life. One day, when someone who you know is asked, who is it in life that has impressed you? Who is it in life that when you think about them, they had an incredible character about them? They were always consistent. When someone you know is asked that question one day, they'll think of you. Because you heard the teachings, the commandments, the promises of Jesus, and put them into practice to build a firm foundation for your life, so that when the climate changed on the outside, you stayed the same on the inside. Can I pray for you this morning? Father, again, we give you thanks for this time together this morning, Lord, for the opportunity to come together, to seek you, Lord, to learn from you, and to praise you with our words and our songs. Lord, this is really tough. We tend to be like a ship on water, Lord, blown all over when the winds change and the rain comes. But Lord, we want to be a house built on a firm foundation. Lord, when life doesn't go as planned, when we receive bad news that we'd rather not have received, that we want to deny, but becomes part of our reality, Lord, we want to remain the same inside. Lord, help us to push past the excuses of personality. Help us to cross over from unbelief. Help us, Lord, through the strength of your Spirit within us, Lord, to stand on your promises, to know that there's always a God who loves us, who always wants what's best for us, and who has better things planned for us. Lord, let that be our foundation, and help us to build each other's houses on that same foundation. Jesus, it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Thank y'all so much for being here this morning. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.